Hi, I'm delighted to host this session today with two very eminent creative professionals and creative leaders from India, Mr. Shekhar Kapur and Ms. Vani Tripathi. Uh, there is absolutely no need for an introduction on this one, so I'm just going to jump straight to it because I know all of you are eager to listen to them. Uh, Yesterday, Shekharji and Vaniji, Warner Media announced in India that they are going to be pulling the plug on their HBO channel and doubling down on some of the kids' channels that they have. At the same time, over the first quarter of this year, Netflix added some 15.8 million subscribers. So we have this duality that the pandemic and the new normal more generally has engendered in media and entertainment. And therefore, I wanted to come to you first, Vaniji. The OTT market in India is predicted to grow at double-digit figures. In fact, over 20% over 2018 to 2023 in terms of CAGR. So what does this accelerated decline of one medium and the accelerated rise of another, what does it mean? How does it impact impact the kinds of stories we're telling today in the Indian creative industry?
Thank you, Vivan, and thank you, RF, for inviting me to Sci-Fi this year. Vivan, I'll delve immediately into what you said. I don't see this as an accelerated decline of one medium, though it could be in terms of numbers, could be looked at as an accelerated, jump for the other. You see, the kind of dystopian times we are seeing right now, we had never seen a time when film theaters would be shut for a long time, when people will be consuming content, as I call the OTT platforms, in their palm. I mean, yes, in the past 4 5 years, there has been a mild explosion into the Indian market as far as storytelling narratives for the OTT platforms is concerned. But given the fact that we are in the process of being in a pushed ecosystem with the COVID realities around us, it would have accelerated, the storytelling narratives and the way they are consumed for the OTT. But Shekhar, for example, who you will come to after I've spoken, has been saying for a long time that we attach too much importance to the theatrical part of, content exhibition. And what does that mean? In India, despite the fact that we are one of the largest producing cinema nations of the world, the density of theaters is so limited that content was anyway being consumed in various forms. First, there was a VHS and a VCR format. Then we saw, what happened on the web, and internet became an important reality to consume content. So early days yet for this new normal. But if a big corporation decides to pull a plug on linear storytelling, that does tell you that non-linear storytelling is the new format now. And we must know that content is not just cinema or web series or short films and documentaries. It's also gaming. It's also the new advent of AI, which is entering our lives very fast. So, with the immersive experience of consuming content and storytelling, I think there is a lot of excitement which is going to, come in with this new forms of content consumption that we are seeing around us. As far as India is concerned, we have to think domestic. Enough of being Western and thinking, about storytelling from a foreign point of view. We are a land of Kathavachaks. We are storytellers. We should be telling our stories much more, and there can never be a more apt time to do so than this one.
Shekharji, this is a great segue to much of what you've actually been saying for the last decade and a half, perhaps, on the changes that we need to anticipate in technology and how they will impact media and entertainment. And one of the discussions we've had in the past is around how media is increasingly defined by what is not media rather than what is media, because now it's sort of interspersed and intersects with gaming, as Vaniji said, and so much more. So, shouldn't we frame our reference in terms of media and what is media and entertainment to evolve in step with the changes in technology?
Yeah, the writing on the wall was there over 10 years ago. We currently have 9,000 screens in India, all of India. China has about 70,000. And they're increasing and we're decreasing. We know that we have 800 million cell phone connections. So if I'm making content, and then we'll come to content, what market should I be hitting? 9,000 screens or 800 million cell phone connections? Where should I be going as one? The answer is obvious. It was there 10 years ago. We knew that. The other thing is that 90% of our so-called theatrical production is not consumed in theaters. It's consumed on cell phones anyway, illegally. We are not getting the revenues in the theatrical business, but in a way we are getting the offshoots of the revenues. What cinema, the media and cinema offshoots, we get the revenues of that. And there are apps like Share It and things which are illegal in a way, but people, I mean, today if you have a chowkidar at home, I bet you he's actually not looking around for thieves that might come in. The chowkidar is looking at a movie on the cell phone. So the writing is on the wall. So we have to accept that there's content and then there's delivery of content. They're two different things. And if the delivery is actually going to 800 million, albeit smaller screens, and smaller screens too have actually evolved. There was a time when the smaller screens were like vague and sound was vague. The leaps in sound, if you look at the earlier cell phones and now, is terrific. The sound is outstanding. Now everybody can buy a headphone. And the headphone sound is almost as, if not equal to the theatrical sound. And the screens are really good. So sound has compensated for size of picture. So the other question, that answer is pretty obvious, and COVID has accelerated that. OTT, yes, people have got used to watching at home, but just remember, India and China, we are small homes, large people, large number. One of the reasons everybody goes out is because we probably have one television screen for 5 people, and then their maids and things. So the propensity to go out is very strong. But will that go to theatrical, or will that go to the cell phone, where people just go outside and get into little groups and get into cell phones? I think it'll be cell phones. I think it's because, but creatively as a filmmaker, I want to see whatever I do on the big screen. So this idea of the big screen, maybe even if it's a day, I want to see it. But then I am propelled and limited by technology. Technology for content is both a propellant and a limiting factor. Let's go back to another thing. Let's talk about OTT. If you look at what's happening in the US right now, 90% of the viewers, the young viewers, are not on Netflix or any other OTT platform. They're gaming or they're on YouTube. YouTube and gaming has become the way to go for young people. That is what they do. They don't watch Netflix. So Netflix also is going to be facing challenges as India goes that way, right? The young people that are growing up are not watching Netflix, okay? What Vani was saying is, in the advent of technology, more immersive experiences are going to evolve. Immersive experiences like content is all about world creation. If you think of content as imagination creation, you're actually creating imagination in somebody that you're telling your story to. Now, how immersive can that imagination experience be? If I'm going to be telling a story, and if I can tell a story within the story, let me explain. I create a world, and I've spoken about this before. Let me say I create a world about the Mahabharata. How about me creating a world of Mahabharata that you, as an imaginer, I am providing the imagination experience to you, and you as the experiencer can actually step into that world, and within that world, you can create your own world. And within the world that you created, other people come to the world you created within my world, and then they keep expanding it like the seed of a rainforest. So you have now the technology to be able to provide the rainforest in which huge strands can come out, strands that you never imagined. And I really get my inspiration from how Mahabharata was told earlier. Before the Gutenberg press, before it was limited by publication, there must be thousands and thousands and thousands of variations of Mahabharata. Each one was narrated, and each one was then carried forward by somebody imagining and then narrating and other people's imagination. So the whole world now, content becomes, we are imagination creators. And how experiential can the imagination be? And if OTT platforms like Netflix do not hurriedly catch up with that technology, gaming is already taking over. And YouTube is already there in technology. And so they have to be careful that they don't get sidelined, even though OTT, normally associated with Amazon, Netflix, that these guys are under threat. Every delivery system that we have I'm not talking about content. Every delivery system that I have, we have, whether it's linear content or what I call the content of providing imaginary ideas, everyone is under the threat of changing technology. So whichever system you develop, the delivery system, you're under threat. And honestly, I really look forward to that world because it's giving people a huge idea and creating huge new stories in which you, as an imaginer or as a viewer, create your own story within the story that I've created.
Vani ji, Shekhar ji on the immersive experiences. But as a creative professional who's writing, producing, directing, how does this change from a push-based linear ecosystem to a pull-based, hyper-personalized ecosystem, from public viewing, which also, by the way, defines standards for content restrictions globally, to private viewing, change how you approach scripts, stories? How do you adapt?
You see, there is absolutely a tectonic shift which is going to happen as far as storytelling narratives is concerned. As Shekhar is saying, as we get more and more immersive, I become the storyteller who's a viewer. I am the game now and I am the story now. It isn't one of those situations where I was painting a picture and I was then deciding how that will be deciphered by the person who's actually viewing it visually, or is accepting it in terms of also audible kind of scenario. With more and more storytelling becoming the centerpiece, and the core of Indian storytelling has been our own stories. So this is also reclaiming a lot of culture around us. But the big change I will see is that we've had these testosterone laden, male centering narratives, which always have been the top heavy, cinematic, sort of experience in India. It absolutely is going to change. I mean, let me remind you, when Shekhar made Masoom, nobody thought of having a gorgeous mainstream film with the child as a protagonist. We used to always say, oh, the Children's Film Society is going to make films for children, which did it badly and still continues to do so. But here was a filmmaker who brought in relationships and a child who was a centerpiece. Similarly, now, with more and more families coming in these time and spending time together, the big change will be the way we tell our stories to our families, to our children. And let me come to the most important part of this narrative, which is the women. We've never had gender equality. We've never had gender parity as to how we tell our stories as far as the other sex is concerned. It's no more the other sex. It's the mainstream gender now. So, including the OTT platforms who've been doing a lot of lip service on representation of women, and they continue to sell these things. Oh, this is directed and produced by women and consumed by them. No, no, no. If a woman director gets a Best Director award at the Cannes Film Festival, she gets it for everybody. It's not just for the women. So similarly, stories will now, and I hope, and I have faith that they will be about equality and balancing of gender. They will be about the aspirations, the sexuality, the desires of also, the women in this country, in India. And as far as the region is concerned, I think the vibrancy which this dystopian time has brought in, it will sound like a paradox that there's vibrancy in storytelling. There is vibrancy because there's so much more content being consumed, and you know that people are actually still sitting together and they're watching this content. So despite the fact that this is privately consumed, there's also a emerging collective to it. I think that will be the driving force. And another big thing that Shekhar continues to say, we have to go back to our epics. It's the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and so many more scriptures and the Panchatantra tales. Let's go back to our Kathavachan, to our stories. So as a producer, the next thing I'm doing, I'm going to be telling my stories of my land, contemporary literature, Hindi and English. We've forgotten. There is so much gorgeous writing happening. It's also the big return of the author, I think. And the author is not a male or a female. The author is an author right now.
So, I mean, this is the capturing the heterogeneity of demand in a sense, which has not been done on linear before, because you always try to achieve the lowest common denominator. So you maximize eyeballs, reach the and generate maximum advertising interest as a result. And what you're saying now is that what we thought of as niche is actually mainstream. I mean, gender is not certainly niche. You have half the world which is excluded from the paradigm, from the mainstream paradigm, if you consider women oriented stories to be niche in any way. Just taking off from there, Shekharji, the and sort of relating to what you said, uh, how do we imagine now? I think part of what you're saying is that stories themselves become platforms where we integrate different narratives, different niches, and everyone, like in social media, can find their space, but in a curated dimension.
The very fundamentals of storytelling are based on something we call mythology, right? Myths are the very fundamentals of storytelling. So our connection, I'm a finite human being. I'm desperately trying to find the infinite in myself, which actually drives a lot of art. My connection to that which is infinite, my connection of that cannot be measured, all of that drives a lot of art, and that also drives storytelling, because what we don't understand, we derive stories out of. And therefore, Indian storytelling has always been very good because it has constantly developed on this idea of finding yourself in the context of a larger eternal self and develop them into myths. And if you look at a lot of Indian storytelling, it is that attempt, and then what we call mythology. And that's why we are a land of myths. And therefore, deriving out of that is a land of storytelling. That's what Vani was saying. And that's why I think there's a political motive also to that. I think that the future wars are not just for wars. The future ideas that we have are is not conquering, influence the hearts and minds of people all over the world. I grew up at a time when Hollywood was influencing me. I wanted to buy jeans. I wanted to eat hamburgers. I wanted to go to Harvard. That's because Hollywood told stories that affected me very deeply, but also sold themselves. I think we can do now a reverse thing, because we are now, one of the great things about platforms, OTT platforms, is they travel the world. They don't need cinemas to anywhere. Anybody can access whatever story we tell here. So we have the opportunity now to reverse the trend where ultimately storytelling that is mythic, that is derived from our cultures, can be interpreted in a million different ways, which films like Avatar did anyway, you know, can be interpreted in a million different ways and carried to the rest of the world. So we can take our culture or derivatives of our culture and allow people to derive more derivatives of our culture in various forms. I think that therein lies the opportunity. But certainly, and technology, that's why in India, that actually has the largest, we have the largest resource of IT professionals. I am surprised right now that in gaming, we are not number one. We should be. We don't, we, because we, in our education, we silo it to say, oh, this is filmmaking, this is gaming, this is storytelling, this is, it's not. It's all one together now. And audiences and viewers don't make the difference. So we have certainly in our education system, the way we teach and the way we create people and storytellers or story imaginers, we need to change that also if we are to make a world, idea of world. I don't like to use the word domination, but I'll use it in terms of conquering the hearts and minds of people through the mythologies that exist within our subconscious. And they've existed. I grew up with them, but they've existed because of a certain idea of the spirit and a certain idea of spirituality within our nations, where it's nothing, it's not religion. It is this very idea in our mythology that ultimately our goal is to find our eternal selves. And that connection between what is our eternal selves, the Upanishads, all of them talk about that. And who are we? Art is nothing but the attempt of artists, storytellers, poets, to find that eternal self. And all of mythology evolves from that. And that's why, in that attempt, which I've grown up with, everybody in India grows up with that, in that attempt, we become great mythic people, mythic storytellers. That's the opportunity. And that's why creating worlds within worlds within worlds within worlds, that's where you start, because you are the seed. We are the seed myths. If you take the seed myths and plant them, they then gradually become a rainforest. And what do we as storytellers need to do, or creators of imagination for other people do? We need to let go of control. We need to understand that I didn't create the rainforest. I'm not capable of, I need other people to contribute. People I'm telling my story to contribute to my story who could then, and in that, but I am the seed. My myth is the seed out of which a million or a billion stories can be told. And as filmmakers or as storytellers, we need to accept that we are not in control. We need to let go of the arrogance of IP. What is intellectual property? Where is who owns the intellectual property for Mahabharata? We need to let go of that. Who owns the intellectual property to Einstein's theory of relativity? Who owns the intellectual property for the Bible? Who owns the intellectual for Ramayana? You cannot, because each story has its own idea, but
This
it also has myth.
this is very interesting, Mr. Kapoor, because some of the biggest technology platforms in the world today, and I'll take the example of the Chinese giant Tencent, which actually owns a lot of Hollywood now. Uh, it came into being. It created the ability for Chinese citizens to express themselves through their avatars in the early 2000s, which became the basis for getting that same ecosystem into what we now know of as WeChat, and then that spun off into so many different things and became the technology conglomerate that it is today. That is just to say that I think the ability of individuals to express themselves through technology is going to surprise all of us. But Vaniji, if I can turn to you and ask you this perhaps strategic and sensitive question, how does India avoid becoming the back end of all of these technological and creative developments that are happening in the world today? How not to replicate, in a sense, the BPO, KPO model that we followed in a large part of our IT services industry? And how do we start to think of ourselves as the tip of the creative spear, the technological evolution? And, obviously, much of it is down to, as Shekhar Kapurji said, about education. You've written about the new education policy and the changes that we wish to usher in. But how do we really engender this mindset shift in people who are entering the industry and people who are incumbents?
Very simply, this is also a kind of a tectonic shift we will have to do. I think through the whole Holocaust of the British Raj, we became so subservient to what, the others think, and the other being the foreigner. So when it was American corporations, as Shekhar very correctly said, they were pulling their agenda of selling their products in our market, and we were very gleefully embracing it. There's nothing wrong in wearing a pair of jeans. But the point is, why have we forgotten that sari is such a beautiful garment? I mean, to take pride in who you are, that cultural nuance that we belong to. For God's sake, we are one of the most ancient civilizations of the world. Every nook and corner of this country is a katha, is a story. The way the grandparents in our country tell stories to their children, whether it's the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or the Panchatantra or the various folk fables, we've forgotten that these are the stories where we belong to. So the beginning would be, let the children walk into a space which is their own culturally, storytelling wise. And I said in the piece which I wrote recently, theater is the most important medium of education because it's an all encompassing medium of an amalgamation of story, literature, music, dance, and fun coming together. And also, as we will start taking pride in who we are, we have to stop looking towards the West. As Atal Bihari Vajpayee very beautifully used to say, start looking at the east and the sun would rise. That is the kind of sunrise we require, our own stories, our own cultural nuance. And there is nothing wrong in shunning away what is not acceptable to us. All over the world, when content is created, there is always an underlying reality to the cultural nuance of where that content is being consumed. There is a lot of debate around what our people should be seeing, what they shouldn't be seeing. Okay, that is democratic. Let people decide, let them have a choice of what they wish to see. But at least we should be telling stories which belong to our own land, which belong to our own culture, which belong to our own children. Let's forget aping what has actually failed elsewhere.
We are a success story in our own right. Every nook and corner has stories in them. So first, let's start reclaiming our epics, our stories, and our old narratives. Once we will own it, everything will smoothen out, and there we will become the Vishwa Guru that we want to become. We will become that teacher that we always were in telling the stories the way we want to tell, not the way the other people want us to tell them.
Shekharji, can you provide some solace to the purists among all of us in the creative space? You are inherently a disruptor, and you sometimes point towards what may be uncomfortable for people to imagine, and you always have counterfactuals. You have countries like France that remain embedded very much within that framework of classical filmmaking. So how do you, when you engage with your friends in the creative industries, if you can lift the veil of some of your private conversations and how they treat some of your ideas?
I tend not to agree with most people, but let's define purism. When you say purist, when they made those films, there were other people who said this is not pure. And when the first films were made, and when they went from one technology to another, when sound first came into films, everybody that made silent films said this is terrible. You're ruining the idea of filmmaking by actually taking sound. We create sound. So every time something changes, something about this concept of purity changes. So this, what you call purity, is a has to be, otherwise it'll die. Purity is a flowing concept. It's an evolving concept. So one of the things that Vani just said, I just like to say, 15% of the world's teenage population lives in India. We have the chance to become what we call an influence economy, right? What is it that why are we not yet the world's influence economy? Because we are using Western technology and Western distribution methods. What is changing now is that as we develop the same technologies, let's say that the world over has developed and employed those technologies and give those technologies to the largest teenage population in the world. If we give those distribution abilities, the dissemination of story abilities to that largest population, we will become what I call the world's most influential economy. In the idea of the influence economy is a huge idea. It's a huge idea. It's how after the Second World War, the U.S. media came out and and made U.S. the second most important export of the United States has been media. First is drugs or arms. Second is media, and that's how now media is grown a million times. The idea of media is everything. Television is media. Social media is media. Film is media. Cartoons are media. Gaming is media. It is the single largest business in the world, in the whole world, and we have the chance now. And I'm not saying that we have to we don't have to be pure. We actually better off not being pure, because purity will get redefined and redefined and redefined with every new technology. Because art and technology, the time you give a crayon to a little child and a child starts to create, you are providing the crayon as the technology. Now you give the child an iPad and the child starts to create. iPad is the technology. What is the future technology that you're giving children? Because the idea of freedom and creativity and the idea of expressiveness is something that we need to nurture in our film, in our children. And Vani is absolutely right. It's the Western system of education that we didn't change for so many years, and it was designed by the British to create a nation of babus. Where did we get a system of education where we ask the child to rebel? Because rebellion and the rebellious mind is the creative mind, the exploratory mind. And so we use technology now to do that. That's what we need to do. That's why I'm saying education, it starts when you're a child.
I think that's just the perfect note and tone to end on, Shekharji and Vaniji. The rebellious mind is the creative mind, something that we need to embrace in India, and hopefully our creative industries can can take some inspiration from this conversation and prepare for the future. Thank you for being here today, and look forward to more conversations on this very interesting theme.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vivan. Thank you, Shekhar.
Thank you.